So, Wagner and Genshin, how are they connected? So just to preface this, I will call him Richard Wagner, not Richard Wagner or something like that. I don't actually know which pronunciation is correct in English, but I'll use this one, since it's the one we use in my native language and it's also similar to the German pronunciation. Now here's a disclaimer. As I say in every video of this type, this is just my opinion and not facts. I unfortunately can't read the developers' minds, and all of this is just my theory of where could the ideas used in some of these examples originate from. Also, I'm definitely not an expert on Wagner, and I knew next to nothing about him before making this video, except some basic information and few notes I read in Nietzsche's books. Which means that there is a high chance I missed some references, so please feel free to correct me in the comments. Alright, so for a quick historical recap, Richard Wagner was a German composer mainly known for his operas. Unlike other opera composers, he wrote both the text and the music for his works. Many of his works are inspired by mythology, especially German and Norse mythology. Wagner also had a friend and disciple named Friedrich Nietzsche, who I already talked about in another video. At the start, Nietzsche admired Wagner, but later Nietzsche was disappointed in him as he saw Wagner's increasing tendency to German nationalism and anti-Semitism. First, there is one funny little reference, and that's Wagner as the blacksmith we see in the game, but I'm not sure if that has any importance other than him funnily enough mentioning that he sold Dainsleif to us, who is probably connected to Wagner, and I'll talk about that in a bit. The opera called Ring of Nibelung, also known as the Ring Cycle, is probably the biggest reference in Genshin we have to Richard Wagner. I only mention the parts that are relevant to Genshin, so forgive me for omitting some parts of the story. It draws a lot of inspiration from German and Norse mythology and legends. In the opera, there is a Valkyrie who is basically a child of Irmin, aka Odin, and the goddess of wisdom Erda. In this part, I obviously theorize that this could be connected to King Irmin, who ruled in Khaenri'ah, Irminsul, and the goddess of wisdom in Genshin, who is also coincidentally connected to Irminsul. The story revolves around a ring forged by Albrich, who is the king of the Nibelung race of dwarves. He gains a power to forge a ring from the gold he stole from the daughters of the river of Rhine, which makes me believe that the ring that Dainsleif was holding as mentioned by Zurvan at the end of the party quest is in fact the ring of Nibelung that could be made by Rhine daughter. Because the Rhine sisters or daughters if you want, that guarded the Rhine river, and the gold or Rhine gold if you will, make me wonder if this is actually a direct inspiration for Rhine daughter. So it would make sense to me that she, with her alchemy, somehow created the ring, or at least created some materials that others used to create the ring. And since she is also called a sinner, I think it could be her. You may wonder if the story in Genshin is inspired by the opera, or if it's more just from the real-life legends, but at least in my opinion it's definitely the opera. Because the ring and some other things that are mentioned there are not from the legends, and all of the things line up too well. The chief of the gods, Wotan, who is inspired by Irmin aka Odin, steals the ring from Albrich. The mortal hero Siegfried eventually wins the ring, but is later betrayed and slain by Albrich's son Hagen, who wants the ring too. In the end, the Valkyrie I spoke about returns the ring to the Rhine maidens and commits suicide on Siegfried's grave. Hagen drowns in an attempt to recover the ring, and in the process both the gods and Valhalla are destroyed. This whole concept of the passing away of gods was more or less an addition of Wagner, which wasn't part of the original legends he got inspiration from, and it's oddly similar to Genshin's overarching themes. Also, if we take all of this into consideration, then Valhalla would represent Celestia, and since we kinda fight the gods, and Celestia seems to be the villain so far, it wouldn't surprise me if Celestia was destroyed at the end of Genshin as well. Also in mythology, Siegfried is often called the Dragon Slayer, well because he is exactly that. And considering how a lot of the ancient dragon sovereigns died in Genshin, I wonder who Siegfried could represent in the game, maybe Dainsleif. In another Whoever's game, Genshin Impact, there is literally a character called Siegfried, who is really important in the game and I won't spoil much. So I wonder if there's going to be a connection in the future. So I already mentioned Dainsleif, but let me speak in more detail about that. In the Kvarena of Good and Evil World quest, Zurvan literally says, I gathered the might of Kvarena according to the divine bird's last wishes, and departed from the Sea of Flowers to subdue the monsters, until I met a golden-haired man out in the wilderness. Half of his body had become that of a monster, but I did not sense an aura of monstrosity in him. When I discovered him, he was holding a ring tightly in his hand. I brought him back to the Sea of Flowers, and when he awoke, he claimed to be a Dari swordsman who had only survived because he had been cursed. So it's obvious that this mysterious swordsman is Dainsleif, and it's likely that the ring he is holding in his hand has something to do with Dragon King Nibelung. Then there is a possible parallel between Dainsleif and Siegfried, and the Abyss sibling and the Valkyrie, as their stories kinda line up, and it would make some sense since when Dainsleif woke up, he traveled together with our sibling for a while, and that also means that our sibling could have that ring right now instead of Dainsleif. And in the story, the Valkyrie also tries to make the destruction of the gods come to pass, which makes her connection to the Abyss sibling even more likely. Also, the ring is supposed to grant immortality, which makes me wonder if that's the reason why Dainsleif is also immortal, but maybe that's just because he is a pure-blood Khaenri'ah. But it could also be the reason why all pure-blood Khaenri'ahs are now cursed with immortality. In terms of Dainsleif, I think it could be the thing that lets Dainsleif keep his sanity over all of these years. In the chasm, once he saw Halfdan, he wondered how he was able to keep his sanity over all of these years, at least without it. And now I'm wondering if that it he mentioned could be the power of the ring. Speaking of Halfdan, it's interesting that in Norse tradition Nibelung is related to Halfdan the Old, who is said to be an ancient legendary king from whom descended many of the most notable lineages of legends. Anyway, the term Nibelung was also used to refer to a real-life Burgundian royal house, and one of their kings was Gunther, who adopted Clothar II as his foster son. In Genshin we have Clothar Alberich, and since he is an Alberich, I wonder if that's the reason why the family had a regent in the past. But what's important is obviously the Dragon King, who is straight up called Nibelung, and I doubt this is just a coincidence. Everything just lines up too perfectly for that to be the case. Since Nibelung is the name of a dwarf race, and in Genshin he is the literal Dragon King, it's interesting that a lot of the dragons in Genshin have dwarf names, like Dvalin or Durin, which makes me think that's a reference too. Sol Albrich is the chief of the Nibelung dwarves in Wagner's opera. In Genshin we know that Anfortas from the Albrich clan had the status of regent in Khaenri'ah 500 years ago, right before the disaster. So we can theorize from this that the people from Khaenri'ah are inspired by Nibelung race of dwarves from Wagner's opera. They all lived in an underground kingdom, and the two Albrichs we know are Kaya, Clothar and maybe Caribert as well. Anyway, all of them are from Khaenri'ah, which fits pretty well. Wagner's opera can also be interpreted in terms of Jungian psychology and in terms of development of the unconscious archetypes in the mind, eventually leading towards individuation. But I already spoke about Jung in another video, so I digress. In the opera story, Freya provides the gods with golden apples that keep them young, which immediately makes me think of some probably not as serious connections, but still. Well, when I think about this, the Golden Apple Archipelago comes to mind, and how it emphasizes youth. Even Alice, who sent us to the Golden Apple Archipelago, talks about youth all the time. Well, probably because of Klee. And I think that there may be a connection. Another crazy connection is that, in Genshin, we are supposed to be in the fourth Samsara cycle, at least according to Narsenkreuz Ordo notes. And we are also the fourth Descender, which could be connected to the fourth Samsaras too. And guess what? Wagner's Singing of Nibelung opera has 4 parts that are respectively the Rheingold, the Valkyrie, Siegfried and the Twilight of the Gods, in that exact order. So that would imply that we are now experiencing the events of the 4th part of the opera, which fits because that's the part where the gods are supposed to be destroyed, and considering how things are in Genshin so far, that seems to be the direction the story is heading towards right now. Wagner in his opera basically depicts Ragnarok, or rather his own take on Ragnarok, which makes me think if Genshin has taken inspiration from that part too, as we recently learned about the existence of Surtalogy, which was in Norse mythology a flaming sword used to destroy the gods. In the opera, the chief of the gods, who is basically Irmin, schemes to gain control of the ring, but over the years he started because of all the sacrifices he had to make, and in the end he lets everything burn to the ground, including Valhalla, and eventually the ring returns. So basically the gods perish and only humanity is left, which not only supports my previous theory about this story representing the overarching themes of Genshin, but also could tell us something more about King Irmin and Khaenri'ah. Maybe the reason why Khaenri'ah had to be burned to the ground is because he tried to get the power of the ring, and in the end something bad happened and Dainsleif took it. But that's too much of a speculation. In the game we can read a short description of the Silver Twig from the Sumeru Archon quest, which states: trees also symbolize wisdom. In one of the legends, a sage hanging upside down on a tree had acquired the knowledge of how to inscribe runes and control sacred words, and thus followed the kingdom established along the tree's roots, eventually gaining a glimpse of the secret of the cosmos. And we actually know about the story where Odin, aka Irmin, planted Yggdrasil and hung himself from the tree upside down. So that could mean that King Irmin actually planted Irminsul, maybe with the help of the ring. I don't know, it's just a feeling, but I think the two could be connected somehow, and it's clear that the legend is about Irmin and Irminsul, and also Khaenri'ah is the kingdom established along the roots. Outside of his Ring of Nibelung opera though, there are some other references too. For example, the great beast mentioned in the book Flowers for Princess Fischl was named, well, this word, which I don't even try to pronounce. And this roughly translates to total work of art, which is a specific term Wagner uses for a type of art that combines multiple forms, like music, poetry, theater and such. In the same book, there is also mentioned an opera writer right next to the name Zarathustra, which is an obvious reference to Nietzsche, and given their relationship, it's safe to consider the opera writer to represent Wagner as well. I noticed that there are many theories of Nibelung being the sinner or a descender, or even both. I personally believe that he could be the sinner, but I don't think that these theories are related to Wagner, so I digress. There are also some references to his opera called Parsifal, as that's where, for example, the name Anfordas comes from, or even the Schwanenritter or the Swan Knights from Canria are also in the story of Parsifal and his other opera Lohengrin, so it's very possible that the Schwanenritter are a reference to Wagner too. But that's about it for this video and the references I found. If you noticed any more references, please tell me about them in the comments. This video actually took a lot of time to make because I was searching through many possible references and theories that in my eyes turned out to not be very likely. Also, if you just search the word Wagner in Reddit, so many things come up that it's almost impossible to go through all of them. I am saying this just to show how many references to Wagner there probably are.